ده بتاع
ده اللي
الوزير.
هيطلع
اه
هم هيتكلموا في ده كلهم.
المفروض يوصل لها.
بصي، ده المايك اللي كلكم هتتكلموا فيه عشان دكتور رانيا تسمعكم. تمام، يعني كله يعني حضرتك هتساليهم اي حد عشان دكتور رانيا تسمعه هيتكلم في ده. تمام، ده هيبقى الاول مع الام سي، هتقدم السيشن وبعد كده هتجيبه لحضرتك. اوكي، في ام سي بس هتدي هتديهولك حضرتك، بعد كده هتدي لي السبيكرز. تمام، فين بس انت لو اتكلموا في البوديوم هيوصل لهم؟ يعني انت مش محتاج ده في حاجه؟ طيب،
احنا نقدر نكنترول ده لو كلام.
وهنا برضو
We need the mic. Everyone's going the other direction. Oh, completely.
And sometimes we have difficulty in seeing where the person is coming to receive your aid. But when I reach there, I will not wait for her, but walk away.
That'll be sad.
Yeah. And it doesn't look like it will end soon.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that signs are not that it's going to end soon. I mean, I can't believe how long.
Mic is on. They control it.
Well, it's impressive that
Thank you.
هنتكلم في الفوليوم زي ما احنا، ده كأنه مش موجود. English. هنتكلم I need work. I need it. You need this? Yes. More work? Full. Yeah. Full.
So you can translate it English?
English, please.
And this is the one.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you need English?
Not among ourselves, but in case someplace.
Good morning, esteemed guests, respected speakers, and valued participants. Welcome to the second day of the Global Congress on Population, Health, and Human Development 2024, held under the auspices of His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Today, we continue to explanation of vital topics that are essential for advancing human development in Egypt and around the world. Your presence here signifies a collective commitment to fostering meaningful dialogue and collaboration. We start off our day with a crucial session titled Financing for Human Development. This session will delve into innovative financial strategies and investments that can drive sustainable human development initiatives. This session features a keynote speech by Her Excellency Dr. Rania Mashat, Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation virtually, and features distinguished esteemed speakers, Ms. Adele Khodr, Regional Director of UNICEF Office, Middle East and North Africa, Mr. Scott Standley, Economist, UN Resident Coordinator Office, Mr. Vito Intini, Regional Lead Economist, UNDP, and this session will be moderated by Dr. Shireen Al Azzawi, Regional Labor Economist, UNDP Regional Office.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and colleagues. Welcome to this important session on financing for human development. It has been almost a decade since countries committed to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was a bold vision for a better future. Yet today, the path forward is more challenging than ever. In 2017, the UN projected that emerging and developing countries would need an additional 2.5 trillion annually to meet the SDGs. Today, that gap has ballooned to $4.2 trillion, which is now known as the Great Financial Divide. The widening gap is not just about numbers. It represents the immense pressure on developing countries to address critical sectors like health, education, poverty reduction, and the climate crisis. The effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, rising debt levels, and geopolitical fragmentation have further strained public finance, with many countries now spending more on debt service than on essential human development. Today's session is going to be very important in discussing how public funds are not enough alone to close this gap. We will talk first about more efficient spending and better tracking. We will discuss metrics that need to be used, and we will touch on prioritizing human development and experiences of other countries of what worked and what hasn't. I look forward to a very rich discussion and innovative solutions. Thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I give the floor to Her Excellency, Dr. Rania Mashat.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody from Washington, D.C. This is the week of the annual meetings for the World Bank, and we are going to be discussing exactly what Dr. Shireen just mentioned. Human development is key for economic growth. Nonetheless, there's no economic growth without financing. Financing is extremely important, and as was mentioned, the financing gap in general for the global goals is widening, and it's even more exacerbated for developing countries that have competing priorities related to climate, priorities related to development, priorities related to, as was mentioned, debt repayments. When we take a look at the past 2 years where the world has been under tremendous pressure, there has been capital flight outside of emerging and developing economies into the developed world just because of the debt repayment. What I want to focus on is financing for development. We have a very important conference coming up next June in Seville, where these priorities are going to be laid out. How can countries and how can the system, the global financial system, support countries in trying to make that very important balance between meeting development goals with human capital at its heart in order to move forward. Let me say that in the case of Egypt, public investments that are spent, 42% goes to human capital development. This includes health, education, and many of the topics that we heard yesterday in the conference. And then we have 37%, which goes to industrial development. And I have to say that both of them are all focused on trying to push human development goals as well. Always and necessarily, there is bridging existing gaps by concessional finance through international partnerships. And I'm very happy that everybody on the panel is actually, through their institutions, working with the government nationally to be able to close development gaps through very designated programs and projects that are focused on different activities. So if I take, for instance, STEM schools, these are projects that we are doing with our development partner, USAID, given the importance. When we take a look at social solidarity programs, Tekaful and Karama, these are programs where there's public finance, but there's also work that is being done with the World Bank. When I take a look at the universal health insurance, public finance, but also at the same time a partnership between World Bank, the AFD, and our Japanese colleagues. So for the ability to be able to move forward, designated, targeted programs, well designed, takes into account experiences, global experiences, but extremely essential to be able to close these development gaps. Another very important aspect is that development gaps are actually considered development or investment opportunities. When we take a look at trying to close the number of schools or trying to close the different, even in the universal health insurance, private sector is a key element. So each and every development gap that is identified provides a very important private sector investment. And that's why when we talk today about financing for development, it's not only public investments, it's not only the concessional finance, but all of this is supposed to lead the way for more private sector investment into vital sectors which are important for countries, but also are considered very attractive for private sector investments. But what is key in all of this, and I will conclude with that, is country ownership. It's very important that evidence-based and data-based policy formulation is there, and identification of these gaps become clear. It's very important that the regulatory environment is clear so that the private sector can come in and provide the bridging of these financing gaps as well. And if we focus on the strategy that was launched yesterday, the National Health Strategy, it is country-led. It was done through inclusive consultations with different stakeholders, and it has 7 priorities: expansion of universal health insurance, coverage with primary care services. Second, promoting healthcare and welfare at all ages, prioritizing main health issues, supporting preventive sectors. So there are several well-identified interventions, all of them linked to well-identified projects where public investment will go in, but most importantly, where the concessional finance and also attraction for the private sector is there. So I think in conclusion, governments cannot do it alone. Multilateral institutions and bilaterals are extremely important for the concessional finance to bridge the gap. But what is very much needed in the period ahead is articulated and targeted projects which would enable also private sector participation so that we can shift each and every development gap, particularly on the human resource, into investment opportunities. And of course, all of this can only be positive and leveraged even further if technology is used, because technological skills and so forth is also very, very important to be able to move the needle on economic development. And of course, as we are, discussing about the international financial system, the architecture itself has been mentioned so many times, be it in the UN Summit of the Future that was during UNGA in September, here this week in Washington. There's also a BRICS conference taking place in Russia. And we also have as I mentioned, the Financing for Development in Seville next June. All of these conferences are asking and calling for a very important topic, which is making sure that the indebtedness of countries does not stifle economic development, does not stifle human capital development, which is the topic of our conference. And this can only be made possible if the international financial architecture provides for more financial resources at a concessional level to help countries find that fiscal space which is needed to be able to achieve many of the objectives I just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I just want to recap on what Her Excellency Dr. Rania mentioned, the importance of public investments with the support of international development partners through concessional finance, paving the way, and I think that is really the key, to private investments that can help bridge the important gap. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Adele to talk to us about her topic.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me well. Good morning, Your Excellency, Dr. Rania. It's really an honor to be in your presence, but also I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for being up at such an early hour of the morning in Washington, but it's good to see you online. And to my colleagues as well, Scott and Vito and Rasha, thank you so much for the opportunity today to be with you at this Global Congress on Population Health and Human Development. I'm really very happy today. Of course, I'm in the presence of two economists, and as someone coming maybe more from the social sciences field, I think I'm going to have probably a little bit of a hard job, you know, but I am really very happy to talk about the important topic today, which is human capital development, which is really at the center of any development process, whether we are talking about economics, social or economic development. The human capital is what we have to deal with. And the human capital has a lot to do with children and a lot to do with young people and what we do about them. There is no greater investment in the lives of children and young people than the investments that governments, but also societies, can make in human capital development. I don't think it is only the job of the government, it's also the job of the societies that are made up of families and parents. As the UNICEF Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa, I had the privilege of visiting all the countries in the region. And in every country that I have visited, I have met people who came from diverse backgrounds, sometimes, of course, or people coming from destitute and socioeconomic classes, and sometimes young people who have made it to university and who are still continuing their studies. But in all my conversations, whether with the children themselves or with the parents, all what they dream about is to be able to give their children an education that will take them into the future. Myself, I'm coming from Lebanon. I studied during the war of 1975-1990. And I remembered that my father had lost all his business in the war. But he told me, there is money, I can give you maybe money, but it will not last for a long time. The only thing that will last is education. And I think I am one of the lucky ones probably who was able to make it in life, and only because of the education. So I just would like to speak really about how important that we all try to meet the dreams of the children and of their parents to be able to equip their children with an education that will take them into a successful and productive life in the future. Children and young people have dreams, and due to economic hardships, many parents are resorting to various negative coping mechanisms that include not sending children to school. In the Middle East and North Africa region, we have around 35 million children who are out of school. That is a huge number. It's also a huge risk for these societies. We also are seeing practices of marrying off very young girls, sometimes even at the age of 10 or 12 years, and we are in the 21st century, where a child that is 10 or 12 is supposed to be in school. And we are also seeing abandonment of family, children that are neglected, and so on. The dreams of the children in our region are being shattered for different reasons, including economic hardships, conflict, and lack of adequate policies for investing in human capital development. Therefore, the time for governments and society to act is now to restore hope and dignity to secure the future for all children. And the best way to do it is to redouble our efforts in human capital investment. How can things be different for a generation of children and youth growing up in hardship? And the first thing that I would like to say is that we can work collectively to ensure that children and their families have access to reliable services that harness and promote human capital development. It goes without saying that a country's human capital is crucial for the well-being of households and central to national economic growth and development, exactly like what Dr. Rania has mentioned. With much guidance to governments in the past on building human capital, has focused on developing skills and education of the youth, but there is more recent evidence that this can occur effectively when built on a strong foundation of investments in early years. This is why we believe that early childhood education is one of the key foundations of human capital development. Then the education sector, it really shows that children who benefit from early education will be able to do better in later years of schooling, thereby improving the efficiency of spending in those later years of a children's life. Children who benefit from early education are more likely to remain in school and not to drop out. That's for something which is proven. The rate of return on investments in early childhood is 10 to 14%. And of course, the third element that I would like to talk about beyond early childhood education and education itself is the investment in nutrition. Studies, including studies from the World Bank, found that young children who are better nourished go on to earn up to 50% more than their malnourished counterparts. Now, if we look at the financing situation, and I'm sure that my colleagues are going to talk more about that, it goes without saying that it is a matter of deep concern that at a time when the world is expected to achieve only 15% of the SDGs, prevailing conditions are such that government in the world's poorest countries are being forced to devote more resources to debt service than to health, education, and infrastructure combined. This is an extremely sad reality. In the last 4 years alone, 165 million people globally have fallen into poverty. 1 in 10 people now live on under $2 per day. And given the conflict, climate, and economic challenges afflicting the world, including our own MENA region, we can expect these figures to continue to rise with resultant devastating consequences for children. Given this harsh reality, the financing landscape has undoubtedly become a cause for concern in a way not seen before. Despite progress to expand liquidity support, high interest rates have combined with maturing debt to create an avalanche of unsustainable debt service over the next 3 years. Rather than driving a green and just transition, our trading system risks being subverted by geopolitical tensions over the control of resources critical for energy transitions. The commitment of developing countries to establish policy frameworks that preserve debt sustainability while defining and delivering on robust plans to promote socially inclusive, equitable, climate resilience, and environmentally sustainable development must be supported. Such support must be realized through official development assistance and development finance at a sufficient scale to enable country-owned structural transformation strategies and move them up the value chain. To achieve this, we need financing to be provided on affordable terms. This would enable countries to have greater fiscal space to invest in their future. We must invest in global public goods, including climate change adaptation and mitigation. And we all know that Egypt has hosted last year the COP meeting, fragility and conflict remediation, pandemic prevention and preparedness, energy access, food and nutrition security, water security and access, protecting biodiversity and nature, recognizing that our societies and economies are deeply interlinked. We must look at new sources of financing that support the energy transition, action for adaptation, and loss and damage. Ours is the responsibility to build a world of dignity for all the planet and all those who live on it. Of course, this responsibility is challenged by what we see happening in the world today. Fragile contexts for which the MENA region is not spared account for 24% of the world population in 2023. And as we are seeing, it is increasing. We expect that this will continue to increase over the future years. Fragility imposes a heavy human cost on affected populations, and children are particularly vulnerable. And we see that in our own region, not far from where we are today, where children are being deprived for the second year of schooling in a place like Gaza. And Lebanon also is at the risk of losing a school year for its children. Another crisis also that adds to fragility is climate change, which is a significant driver of vulnerabilities for children and their families, with 4 out of 5 children facing at least one extreme climate event per year. Even countries like Morocco and Algeria this year did not also run away from or escape from the floods that have occurred very recently. Climate-related shocks can significantly impact children's life course by directly damaging homes and livelihoods, as well as indirectly by disrupting public services and essential infrastructure, such as schools and health services, affecting children's access to care. And disease outbreaks remain a significant driver of humanitarian needs. Over the past 2 years, cholera has been reported in 29 countries across the world, and 4 of these countries are in our own Middle East and North Africa region. And of course, you all know that the vaccines that are available globally are not able to protect all the children and communities from cholera. In conclusion, the MENA region needs to continue building its human capital even during these difficult times of climate, pandemic, conflict, and economic shocks and disruptions. Within this, women and girls, who make up half of our societies, require special attention to enable increased access to health, education, skills, and labor market participation. Although many countries in the MENA region have shown their sharp focus on protecting human capitals by ramping up cash transfers and strengthening social safety nets, stronger efforts are still needed to preserve the human capital of internally displaced persons and refugees and to foster social inclusion for economic mobility. Utilizing human capital is important to the immediate recovery and long-term development of the Middle East and North Africa. This region has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world at almost 25%. Utilizing human capital requires job-focused policies as concerns about the future of work grow louder and louder, especially in our region. When today's children in MENA become adults, hopefully they will see how the region of the world turned the unprecedented and multiple crises into an opportunity to build stronger human capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Adele. Thank you very much for reminding us about the importance of education as a vital vehicle for human mobility, and especially early childhood education, and how this is not just a right or a development goal, but it's also economically the right thing to do, and the thing that has a very high rate of return. I believe Dr. Rania would like to give a word. It's very early in the morning for her, very late for her, so we'll let her give her word and go to sleep. Go ahead, please, Dr. Rania.
Thank you so much, Shireen, and thank you, Adele, and everybody. And I have the G24 meeting at 8 a.m. and it's 3:30 a.m. now. But I just wanted to say that interventions and programs that we do with UNICEF or different institutions under the bigger umbrella, the UN SCDF, all of them really focus on a lot of the elements that you mentioned, be it education, be it community schools in different governorates. We also have the national project Haya Karima, or Decent Life, which also has interventions across various villages looking at health services, education, family planning. So there's in areas where there are needed targeted interventions. There's also the school feeding program that we have with the World Food Program. And when we talk about innovative financing tools, debt swaps for development are another program that Egypt has done with many of its development partners. And there are also programs which target children, target human capital, and have also health services. So I believe that when there is trust between the country and its different partners, this also opens the way for innovative ways to maximize and leverage the financing that exists to be able to address many of the key challenges. But thank you for your words on children, because absolutely they are the most vulnerable, and therefore targeted programs related to schooling, related to early care are also going to be fundamental engines for economic growth. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure joining all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rania. I hope you get a few hours of rest. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Scott Standley, economist at the UN Resident Coordinator Office.
Thank you, Shireen, and thank you to my fellow panelists, Adele and Vito, and of course, thank you to Her Excellency Minister Rania for this invitation and for allowing me to participate in this session. I think that this is a very important session in the across the entire week. This discussion of financing underlies essentially everything else that we're doing. I think that when you think about a budget and budget allocation, this is a reflection of a government's priorities. This is essentially where you express how you are prioritizing what is most meaningful, where you want to put your emphasis. This is actually where I think that you might have a cliche where you walk the talk, so to speak. I think we've heard a lot, which I fully agree with this week, about raising human development, human capital to be a central, fundamental component of your development strategy, not an add-on. And I think that is very clear that this is essentially a prerequisite for this sort of prioritization of human development financing in a world of limited resources. I think we do have to admit that even with that political will, with that commitment, we do have constraints. And I think that that's one of the things that we're talking about here. The most recent, the last Financing for Sustainable Development report released over the summer estimated that the financing gap in lower middle income countries is 5% of GDP. For low-income countries, it's more than double that, over 10% of GDP. And so I think here the discussion needs to encompass all aspects of financing. And I think Dr. Rania touched on this very clearly, and as well as Adele. So we're talking about the mobilization from public sources, from private sources, international and domestic. I think on the resource mobilization side, there are different instruments or different approaches across the entire range of potential flows. And then we also, though, very much in this discussion, are talking about the allocation of what's available. So I think that it's about the mobilizing more money, but then spending it more efficiently and more effectively. Because I think, as we know, levels of spending for health or education is can be a crude measure, I think, of this commitment, because there's many different ways of spending that money within those sectors. So then it's about how do we spend this money most effectively in the health sector to get this return on investment that Adele was talking about. So I think it has both dimensions when we think about mobilizing resources, but then how do we spend it? I think for my intervention, I wanted to do two things. I want to talk a little bit about two of those areas for resource mobilization and spending that are affecting, I think, our ability to prioritize. Keeping this overall idea of looking at both international and domestic sources. I want to talk about debt, which we've heard from Adele already, but then also about the domestic resource mobilization and the tax system and the role that can play for mobilizing additional resources for human development. And then I did want to at least try to bring it together to a country example of how all of these different things have come together, maybe where there has been a successful case. I think this is one of the most important values of a discussion like this, is that we know that there's a lot of challenges. We know that no one has been perfect. It's always going to be difficult. Where can we see where the things have come together in a way that has led to the type of success that we're talking about here? So let me start with on debt. So I think we clearly cannot divorce this discussion from the debt burden that has increased so dramatically in recent years. I think that same Financing for Sustainable Development report noted it's the largest debt burden since the early 2000s, so basically right after the Asian financial crisis. And I think we know that this is disproportionately affecting the lower income countries. So the biggest impact has been on Africa. I think the estimate is 40% of African countries do right now spend more on debt service than on health and education combined. I think Adele made this point very clearly also. The IMF has estimated, I think it's 55 countries are either in debt distress or at high risk. And I think these issues are also relevant very much for Egypt, where we have quite a big debt burden. I think the estimates are that over 50% of revenue will be spent on interest payments. And so I think all of these things mean that you are squeezed about your ability to finance the human development investments that you need. I would say both short and long term. And this is the sort of thing that can create the cycle. Essentially, you are forced to kind of prioritize debt service over human development investments. That also then can lead to lower growth, more dependence on debt, growing debt, et cetera. And so it's kind of a vicious cycle that we want to break out of. So what are the options here? And so I think taking one step beyond the countries that are in, let's say, a debt crisis and looking at restructuring debt, there are some instruments that are emerging from some of the discussions that Dr. Rania mentioned, from the UN Secretary General's SDG stimulus plan, the Summit of the Future, also a lot of the discussion around climate finance start with COP27, but of course with COP29 coming up. One of those would be debt swaps, which has been used very effectively, I think, here in Egypt. But I think then we're also looking at different mechanisms for making it even more effective and more impactful, reducing the transaction costs. So taking either regional approaches, which is one thing that is being, one initiative being developed by UN colleagues at ESQA in Lebanon, but then also the idea of trying to pool the debt. So in essence, it's not the long negotiation process, a monitoring framework for every individual project, but potentially pooled donors into a common debt swap arrangement. And so these are the sorts of things that could, I think, be a little bit more impactful than what we've seen so far. A second thing would be looking at what they call the state contingent debt instruments. So these would be the debt instruments that are tied to developments within a country. So this could be to GDP or to commodity prices. So in essence, it would be the debt servicing might be higher in good times, but then more relaxed when things are more difficult. A third, I would say, is on the debt pauses. And so I think this was one of the big achievements, I would say, of the COVID era through the debt service suspension initiative, where debt service was paused in the middle of the crisis. But this is also something that has come up as becoming more of a feature of new lending arrangements. I think the most prominent is likely the climate resilient debt clauses, which I know the World Bank, EBRD, IADB, and some other institutions are incorporating, which would essentially pause your debt obligations in the instance of a climate disaster. But I think there's different ways of thinking about what would be the triggers of those pauses, but that would give relief to this, to perpetuating the cycle that I mentioned earlier, which is where when there's a crisis, this could set you back for decades, and you might have to redirect resources away from some of your human development needs, which might erase everything that you've done prior to this. So I think we also have to make that link between shocks, crises, and our long-term vision of human development. So these would be sort of one of the ways of thinking about that. One thing I would add, though, that is worth remembering here is a lot of this, I think the experience has been a lot of this is more feasible on new instruments, and the renegotiation of existing ones has proven to be, I think, more challenging for various reasons. So this is a bit more of a forward-looking idea about how we think about debt in the future. As a second point here, I did want to talk about, let's say, the unrealized tax potential, domestic resource mobilization. There was a recent IMF review that estimated, I think, on average, developing countries could generate somewhere between 4 to 6 percentage points of GDP in additional revenue through closing tax loopholes, ending tax holidays, tax administration reforms, what we might consider in a discussion like this the non-innovative financial mechanisms. But this goes back to where I started. I think it is a combination of different approaches, because I think the reliance on the innovative finance, it's very important, but that alone will not get close these financing gaps the way that we're talking about and reach the scale. So I think it needs both. And I think that there's a general consensus, I would say, that most countries do have untapped potential. I mean, we look at Egypt and just some statistics. Egypt tax revenue over GDP as a share of GDP is much lower than its neighbors. I think it's about 12, 13%. I think the mean average is over 20. And I think that then we do see, just as a share of GDP, social spending lower than some of its neighbors. So there could be some link there. And I know that this is also a lot of the government has very important tax reform initiatives already launched. These are vital, I think, for this discussion, because essentially most of the human development spending will be from domestic resources. It can be supplemented, facilitated by international resources, but this is a fundamental piece of this discussion. Let me then I'll try to bring, as I said, an example of maybe bringing it together. And I think when we look across the Africa region, I think that Rwanda is a very good example where there has been a lot of success, I think, in a very short time from a relatively low level in a resource restricted environment of raising human capital. And I think this is not, these factors are not exclusive to Rwanda, but I think it's illustrative. And I think we've seen this. I used to work for a long time in Southeast Asia. We've seen similar stories from the ASEAN countries that have made a lot of progress. A couple of things. I think first, if we go back to high level commitment and this emphasis on the elevation of human development to a core part of your development strategy. I think in Rwanda, health and education was one of the 3 pillars of their growth strategy, along equal to investments in infrastructure, et cetera. So it took a very high level place, which essentially drove the entire mandate for the government change, the investments, et cetera. There was a commitment to an overall tax reform, and I think here there was an establishment of a single tax revenue authority, but there was also a lot of work on essentially changing the relationship between a government and the state and the entire culture of taxation and compliance. And we saw a big rise in tax revenue as a share of GDP. I think here, what makes it a little different than a lot of countries, I think in the MENA region, would be that there was a very high level of ODA and foreign assistance. I think this was coming out of the crisis there. But I think if we think about not just the level, but also the use, and it was I think a very strong, let's say, strategic use of the assistance that was coming in to tie to their plan and to make sure that it aligned with the government priorities, and then aiming towards then an eventual withdrawal of the foreign resources so that it becomes sustainable for the government. Because I think especially in something like in this area, in the social sector, social protection, I think that external resources are very important as a support and to help launch. But I think in the long term, we do want to think about this transition to where it's sustainably financed through a government budget, which is basically what we're aiming for here. The last thing I would say, which I think, I'm sorry, which fits with what my colleague Adele talked about, which was at the center of their approach on human development, was the life cycle. And so it was very targeted strategic interventions across different dimensions, from child nutrition, early childhood development, and then also strengthening community health centers as a way of reaching out to the marginalized and remote communities. The last point I would add here, which I think we might get into later, is on the use of evidence. And I think Adele also mentioned this, is about the investment case is very strong, but there's a culture of evidence building, but also the use of that evidence for making these decisions about where to invest your money. It's not just about the starting point, about the evidence for making that initial allocation, but then it is about the regular and, let's say, consistent, systematic commitment to impact evaluation, or to review and to adjust as needed. I think a lot of these things can be considered experiments, and we don't know the answer at the beginning. And I think so when you do have the decision about where to allocate, then it is about, this is dynamic. It's not a static decision, and you need to have the culture, the systematic approach for evaluation, adaptation, and change. And I think the successful examples across the world, you can see that what might have been started 10 years ago has changed pretty significantly in response to changing circumstances, changing knowledge about what's effective, etc. I think I'll stop there, and maybe we can pick up some of the other points in the discussion. But let me again just thank. I don't think I thanked all the participants in the crowd in my introduction, but thanks to you for joining us, and we look forward to a good discussion. Thank you. Back to you, Shireen.
Thank you very much, Scott. You mentioned a very important point about the importance of relying on a multiple set of resources, both new innovative financing tools, but also tax reform and closing the tax loopholes. We learned about the experience of Rwanda, which of course has been a very bright experience in this respect. I give the floor now to Mr. Vito Intini, Regional Lead Economist for the UNDP Regional Hub in Amman. Vito, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me. I have a pretty long presentation. I will skim through some of the slides, but we'll build on what my colleagues have been talking about. starting with a consideration that there is no development without finance and there is no finance without development. The first global general consideration is the financial system as we know it is not designed, tailored to serve people and planet. Very often is designed for its own structure, systemic considerations, and of course, market aspects. When we talk about financing system though, we should be talking about both public and private finance. Here you can see globally how much it's allocated to fossil fuel subsidies, which is a big share of the public resources that are available. And also you can see commercial banks globally again very often allocate part of their financing to fossil fuel industries. Global insurance, still a long way to be further developed. Around 90% of people around the world in low-income countries do not have access to insurance instruments. And we could continue so on and so forth. We were talking about the debt service that is increasingly over the last 12, 13 years, particularly in low and middle income countries, as you can see globally. Overall, the global wealth that is estimated, according to the most recent estimates, is around $477 trillion. What is needed to close the gap to achieve the SDGs annually is around $4.2 trillion. Of course, we cannot compare stock and flows, but still, just to give you an idea of the scales of what we have globally in terms of wealth, concentration, and what we need in terms of financing flows to bridge the gap, both for the SDGs and also for the national determined contributions financing needs, which is around $2.4 trillion. Of course, financing systems and financial markets have their own laws and dynamics, obviously, and rightly so. But when there is a shock, either external or endogenous shocks, of course, a lot of low-income countries and fragile countries will have additional financing needs, and the markets will not be able to address those financing needs on concessional terms. This is what the minister was talking about, the need of concessional financing when is needed, particularly in case of low and middle income countries. So we were saying initially that financing and development are part of the same coin. One without the other will not be possible. Let's look at some correlations globally. You can see HDI, which is our index that UNDP produces on human development, and some financial variables. One is the Financial Development Index, which is produced by the IMF. You can see the clear correlation across the distribution globally. The same when it comes to a governance-related aspect of public finance, which is budget transparency on the right-hand side. You can see quite tight, close correlation with HDI. So basically, while this is not telling you that there is a causation, there is a clear relationship between human development and those financial variables. To continue on budget transparency, this is the global ranking, the top part. You can see that a lot of middle-income countries and even one low-income country are very high. The maximum is 100. Georgia is at the top of budget transparency according to the Open Budget Survey. Even middle-income and low-income countries can be very high in their systems, budget transparency systems. And the literature has already established a clear correlation between some governance indicators and the public finance. The better is your governance system, the better is your public financial scores. Budget oversight, same story. There are a lot of examples of countries that have been doing a lot of reforms, both middle-income countries, but also further down the distribution, you will see also some low-income countries. Public participation. There are principles on public participation, some of which are critical, like accessibility, openness, inclusiveness, timeliness of budget, to be shared with the public and to let the public participate. Here, globally, the performance is lower compared to the other two that I was talking about. South Korea is still performing well. According to the Open Budget Survey, the score above 60 is performing a good, well-performing score. But there are countries that are improving. One of those, you can see Egypt is not bad in the ranking. Still, there is a work to do, but processes, reforms are moving forward. Here we look at the association between health expenditures, some of the social expenditures, and the satisfaction with public services, satisfaction with the healthcare system, and satisfaction with the education system, according to the Arab Barometer. So the interesting part is that when it comes to health, there is a positive correlation between health expenditure and satisfaction, mildly, but still a positive correlation. When it comes to education, no. There is a negative correlation. Now, this is to tell you, to warn you, that while correlation can give you a picture, an interesting picture on overall relationship, at the same time, there are other variables that we need to take into consideration. Here we show the correlation between expenditure on health and some of the development outcome indicators. Maternal mortality on the left, child mortality on the right. And here again, you can see a clear correlation across the global distribution. Here, we are showing the correlation between expenditure and education, public expenditure, and an outcome indicator like lower secondary participation rate for female and male students. What you can see here, besides that clear trends in terms of correlation, we also drew a frontier, an efficiency frontier, which basically is telling you that countries that are performing the best can be used as a reference, and therefore you can see, you can measure, estimate the potential level of inefficiency compared to that frontier. Those are different techniques that can be used, statistical econometric techniques, that can show you, measure this kind of inefficiency and inform policy reforms moving forward. The same can be done at a broader level. Here we put together expenditure on social protection and health with aggregate indicators, HDI, inequality adjusted HDI, and governance inequality index. Again, there is a clear correlation between those. So it's important when we start reforms, policy and programmatic reforms in the financial sector, in this case, public finance, also to bear in mind how to elevate those outcome performances. Finally, association between poverty rates and social protection. Globally, again, it shows that there is a clear correlation at different level poverty lines, but still important to bear in mind that social protection can have an impact as well on poverty. This is a study we did together with ESQA and UNICEF 2 years ago on social expenditure. When you look at the aggregate of health, education, and social protection, the region is spending less compared to the global average. This is true for high-income countries in particular, and also for fragile and conflict-affected countries. Middle-income countries, they are more or less at a similar level. Where they spend the most subsidies, then early childhood and primary and secondary education, and then cash in kind, support income. But subsidies by far show a big part of the public expenditure. So we were doing estimating some, using some proxies, some indicators of social spending efficiencies. In some sectors, the region is performing on par with the global average. In some others, again, education, remember the negative correlation between education and spending, and housing are performing in relative terms lower compared to global averages. And a lot of this spending goes to current expenditure. Of course, other indicators can show you the equity level of expenditure. This is out-of-pocket expenditure before COVID, and it shows that there is a positive correlation between out-of-pocket expenditure and maternal mortality rate. But since we are talking about human capital, there are some interventions that can be very effective. Here we are showing, according to microdata surveys, the support in terms of vocational training and financial assistance for different wealth deciles of workers. Those who are more satisfied normally have a higher support, have received higher support while entering the market, the labor market, in both cases. So this is something to bear in mind when we were considering a high rate of return on some of the investment. Then there are macro level considerations. One is on the budget, an increasing trends towards SDG aligned, SDG tag budgeting, which is important. There are some examples here I'm showing. And also there are ways to enhance expenditure efficiency through digital solutions. And here we're giving some examples, one from Brazil, using electronic payment cards, reaching out to millions of people. Another one on digital infrastructure for education in India, reaching out many millions of people. That makes the whole process more efficient. On taxation that Scott was referring to, there is in some countries of the region a higher impact or proportion of indirect taxation. Now we know the pros and cons of indirect taxation. While it's easy to collect taxes, it's also potentially regressive on some of the income groups. So I cannot spend more time because it's limited. In the meantime, there has been a reform in the global system through responsible financing and sustainable financing, as I'm showing here, towards more impact solutions rather than market systems. One aspect that is increasing in terms of trends globally is thematic bonds, both green, sustainable, and sustainability-linked bonds. An example from Uzbekistan where there were clear performance indicators to those bonds that have been identified and produce many results in terms of transportation, in terms of support to children, schools, access to schools, and so on and so forth. Those are some clear examples that have produced results. So I will skip. One aspect is also reducing the cost of remittances using digital solutions, like in this case. And one final critical point is this framework, the Integrated National Financing Framework. As you can see, I went through a number of different dimensions that are important when it comes to financing for development, for human development. This one tries to put all of these dimensions together in terms of better coordination across sectors with national development plans, but also pulling together different financing sources in a consolidated financing strategy. that includes public, private, international, and domestic financing flows. This is an example from Mongolia, which has been pretty successful, with an institutional coordination mechanism that involves many actors, public and private actors.
Vito,
And Egypt has just approved
Vito,
its,
if I may please ask you to
its
conclude.
financing
Yes,
strategy.
sorry.
Yes, I'm closing now. It has just approved the financing strategy. This is a bit of the pillars that we consider when we put all this together with different financing instruments and solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vito, for a very comprehensive presentation, reminding us of some of the prerequisites for private sector engagement and providing some excellent examples of how countries around the world have used various ways of financing to achieve development goals. I would like to open up the floor now to some questions from the audience. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Please go ahead. تفضل. Are there mics for the audience?
Hello, my name is Mahmoud Sarwat. I am a student economics and political science at Cairo University, and I have a question. Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, my question is: do you provide opportunity for youth in Egypt related to human development? My question is related to financial human development.
Are you directing your question to Mrs. Adele? Mrs. Adele?
For all.
The whole floor. Okay. Go ahead. So the question was, how has Egypt been doing in terms of spending on human development? Is that correct?
No, organization, Dr. Adele and Dr. Scott and Dr. Vito, how you do provide opportunities for training to youth in Egypt related to human development?
So the question was about providing opportunities for youth in Egypt for training on human development.
I can start.
Well, so I'm in the Egypt country office here, and I think we have quite an extensive programming with young people, a wide variety of different training opportunities. I think it is being led. We have an inter-UN agency team led by UNICEF and UNFPA. There are a lot of different training opportunities that we've done on climate. Different topics. I do think as we are thinking about human development specifically, I think this is something we can look into to try to build into our overall program. But I would say that I think the engagement with young people is one of our priorities as a UN system here in Egypt. Yeah, I think that's what I would have to say on that. I think there are certainly a lot of opportunities to engage with young people through our different agencies and programs.
Mrs. Adele?
Maybe just to complement what Scott has said, I think there are a number of UN agencies, including UNFPA, UNDP, ILO, UNESCO, and UNICEF, that are supporting a priority for the region that we call the transition from learning to earning. And as Scott was mentioning, this focuses on young people. And in Egypt, there is a partnership between, of course, the government led by the Ministry of Youth and Labor with the work on the program of Shabab Balad, and then in partnership also with private sector and with another global youth initiative, to be able, exactly what Scott was mentioning, to provide opportunities for training for young people and link them to employment opportunities. And in the region, Egypt has the highest cohort target of young people. So that, I think, is a clear example of the attention on young people here. Thank you.
Vito?
Maybe quickly, yes, there are a number of initiatives, programs on, for example, on business acceleration, incubation and acceleration for entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs in particular, providing skills, coaching, tutoring, and also connecting them with other investors and business opportunities. Now, is this enough? No. There is so much in terms of demand and request. Just in the case of Egypt, the estimate is between 800 and 900,000 new entrants into the labor market. Regionally, many students, when they get into the labor market, either they have a transition period, which is a waiting period before finding a proper job, or they get into the informal sector in middle and low income countries. GCC is a different story. So one of the important points or objective is to try to shorten that transition time between from learning to earning. This will require systemic solutions. So that's why all these different aspects, when we're talking about financing, are important, and they need to come together, both on public and the private finance part. Thank you.
Another part from my question.
One more question over here.
Another part.
There's only time for one more question. Can we have? Yeah.
Another part from my question.
Can you please pass the mic? Yes. Thank you. We only have 2 minutes left, so if you could please ask your question. Yeah.
Mahmoud Dawood from Asharqiyya Governorate. My question for Mr. Scott, from your review, how can local authorities units do their part to help economic reform?
Scott, did you hear the question? Yeah.
Do we want to do another one or just go? Yes, thank you. And I think yes.
Thank you.
Local units are fundamental to this type of work. One of the things that we are working on, and I would echo what Vito said when I talk about one of our interventions, is that these are interventions, almost experiments and tests, and that the issue that there is about scale and about making it more systematic. But one of the things that we're working together, actually, with both UNICEF and UNDP and UN Habitat, is on exactly this issue. It's about working at the local level in a few governorates to start. That is talking about participatory planning, budgeting, and monitoring programs. And so basically, the way that it's working is partnering with the Ministry of Planning, Economic Development, and International Cooperation on testing different models at the local level for being more responsive to citizens' needs, to improving service delivery, to being more transparent and monitoring the impact of interventions, being open about the budget and transparent budget, bringing people into the budget process. This is one of a very good program that the UNICEF has with the Ministry of Finance which is about transparency and budget, a people's budget, etc. And so I think that there's quite a lot going on. But again, I'd finish just to echo is that this is this takes a lot to scale, and I think that where our interventions are to work and to try to test and to see what the impact is, and then the hope is that this could be expanded in a more systematic way. But the short answer, which is already too late because I went long, is that it's a fundamental piece of this entire effort for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I apologize for the remaining questions. Perhaps you can talk to the speakers over coffee. I'm told that we have to end the session. But thank you all very, very much for being here for this very rich discussion. And I look forward to seeing you in other sessions over the course of this Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insightful contributions. We will now take a short coffee break. Use this time to network and discuss the key ideas presented. We will reconvene in 30 minutes at 11:45. Thank you.